Hi, this is Bob Burton, and you're listening to the Corner Cutter Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to the Corner Cutter Podcast, the podcast all about speed cubing and how to improve. I'm your host Josh, and you can find show notes to this episode as well as other good information on the podcast website, thecornercutterpodcast.com. Today I have a chat with Bob Burton. He is from the World Cube Association board. And we talk mainly about his responsibility of being on the board, about delegates, and also about organizing nationals. I recorded this interview with him on April 8th, 2018. So you'll hear us talk about the Northeast Championships. I asked him when they're going to be announced, and now they are announced. I'm sure all of you will learn a lot from this interview. Also, you guys might not know this podcast is also posted on YouTube. It's on my channel, Corner Cutter, and it might make it easier for some of you guys to consume. So if you are listening on YouTube right now, please leave a comment down below. Now let's move right on to the interview. Okay, now we have Bob Burton from the WCA board on the podcast. Bob, thank you for joining me.
You're welcome. How's it going?
I'm doing great. Excited to do this interview. I have a lot of good questions, at least I think, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to learn a lot as well as the listeners.
I hope so.
Okay, well, to start out, maybe on a controversial topic. Actually, it pretty much is. What event is going to be added to the WCA, if any? And then after that, maybe you could explain the process of adding an event?
Sure, that's a great question. So the adding an event is mostly initiated by the WRC, the Regulations Committee. They do so by looking at what the community interest is, practicality, what events might be consistent with the spirit and mission, interesting to solve and watch, and might have a unique challenge compared to other events. So as of now, I'm not sure of any that are going to be added, but if they are, that would be initiated by the WRC. They would probably make a poll to the WCA staff and external staff and then propose it based on the feedback, and then it would be approved by the board.
Mm-hmm. So how popular does an event need to be? Like for Scube, I wasn't cubing back then, so I'm not sure how that came about.
The history of that one, I think it could be found on GitHub, but typically the more popular it is, the more likely it is to be added. And having events held unofficially certainly helps prove their popularity.
Was that the case with Scube?
I believe it was, but I'm not too familiar with the whole process of when that was added.
Okay. Now, I know Kibby Minx, or Kilo Minx, as some people call it, has been held unofficially at quite a few competitions. Is the popularity enough yet for anything to take place?
That I don't know. That would be a good question for the WRC.
Okay. In your opinion, do you think any event should be added, and would you like to see that?
I think any event that people find to be interesting and would add more fun to the WCA would be added, would be a good candidate. But I'm not too familiar with all those events right now. So I know that there was quite a few instances of Kilominx being held unofficially, and I know that there was even a spreadsheet to keep track of those unofficial events, but I'm not sure if that's been done recently. I think that might have died down a little bit, but I'm not sure.
I know one of the reasons some people don't want to add events to the WCA is Nationals and Worlds would be longer. They're already jam-packed with 3 or 4 days. Would that be a problem with adding any others?
Most likely that would just mean that we would have to figure out how to balance our time. It might mean lower qualification times in order to have the time gained from other events, or maybe even holding fewer rounds of other events to make more time for a new one.
Okay, that sounds good. What is your responsibility with the WCA board? What's your job?
There's quite a bit. So one of the things is to oversee the staff and external staff of the WCA and to just sort of guide the day-to-day activities of the WCA. I also try to supervise the relationships between the WCA and regional organizations. Probably the most time-consuming part is announcing competitions. Now there's, on average, 25 or 30 competitions a week being announced. So that's definitely time-consuming. But also occasionally representing the WCA in dealings with other organizations or negotiations, and amending bylaws and motions. I'm the secretary for the organization, so I also keep minutes of our meetings and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So that means lots of emails, right?
Tons of emails. It's hard to describe how many, but on average, probably about 2,000 to 3,000 emails a month.
Wow. So you got to really stay on top of that stuff.
Yeah.
That's a big job. What do you enjoy most about being on the board?
I like writing policies that will shape the future of the WCA, and trying to put my vision into practice.
Mm-hmm. Now, could you tell a little bit of your background with the WCA and how you got into speed cubing?
Sure. I started cubing in 2001. I was in high school, and I bought a cube and brought it to a crew regatta just to kill the time while we were there, because you're there all day, but you only have usually 1 or 2 races. They're about 6 minutes each. And so I would just try to get one side, and we would try to see who could do one side the fastest. And I got so into it that I started learning the whole cube, and then I started trying to get faster and faster. So I attended my first competition in 2003 at the World Championship, and that was really exciting because I got to meet a lot of the people that I only knew from online, from the Yahoo forums. And then I started organizing competitions at Rutgers, where I started a cube club. So I started organizing competitions there in 2005 and became a delegate in 2006. Then I joined the results team, where I was part of the team where I would post the results for competitions. I did that starting in about 2008. A few years later, Tyson Mao and I went out to Colorado, and we formed the gear team by establishing a relationship with Speed Stacks. So I was on that team for a few years. And I was also a senior delegate beginning in 2013, and I joined the board in November last year.
What is the biggest change you've seen at WCA competitions over all the years you've been there and since the WCA started? Like, how are competitions run differently in, 2006 versus now?
Well, they're a lot bigger now. That's probably by far the biggest change. They're also a lot more efficient, but back in 2005, 2006, most competitions where I am were maybe 30 to 50 competitors. Now, a competition has to have a competitor limit, because otherwise there would just be too many people for us to handle.
I saw a few months ago one of the competitions in New Jersey. It filled up in 40 minutes.
Yeah, and that's been pretty normal for this area. Competitor limits of 100 to 150, and they still fill up in less than an hour. But we implemented a new proximity policy in November that's been helping. It's not a final solution, but it means that there's more competitions, and we're able to hold more competitions more often. So it is helping to meet the demand of what people want to attend. And so we have noticed that competitions are taking longer to fill.
Okay. What does the proximity policy exactly do? Like, if you want to have a competition that's within the distance or time frame of another one, what's the process for you guys in deciding it's okay?
So the rule is that within 18 days and 100 kilometers, or fewer than 19 days and 100 kilometers driving distance, there's supposed to be only one competition in that range. So we would only typically approve more competitions if they're either further away in distance or spread out in time. The exceptions to that are if maybe there's no events that overlap, maybe like a PBQ competition where it just has blindfold events or fewest moves or something. But the idea of the rule is to give more diversity in competitions, both in space and time, so that there's not competitions every weekend and that competitions aren't always held in the same place.
Okay, I see. Could you explain a few of the other changes in the WCA that happened recently? I think it was in December, like the feet average of 5 and the blind, like not having a logo on the blind cubes. Could you explain why you decided to switch those?
Sure. So that was also initiated by the WRC. So the way amendments to the regulations occur is the WRC typically asks for feedback from the community to determine which changes would be best. And then there's this individual discussions about each of those changes. But once they decide which changes they want to propose, they submit the entire list of changes to the WCA board for approval. And there's also usually an online discussion among the other delegates about these changes before they take place. But one of the reasons for making feet average of 5 was mostly for consistency and for the amount of time it takes to do a solve has been reduced quite a bit in recent times. So it does make sense to give an average of 5 instead of a mean of 3.
Do you see 6x6 or 7x7 coming to that place anytime soon?
I don't. I really don't think so. Even though people are getting faster in those, one of the problems with those events is the scrambling as well. And so for 6x6 and 7x7, you'll also see regulations about if the scramble is not done correctly, the delegate has permission to allow that scramble to stay even though there's a mistake in it. And part of that is because it just takes so long to scramble those puzzles, and to do so accurately is really tough. So doing 3 times is already time consuming. Doing 5 times would be even longer.
Especially if you have people scrambling who are not as fast as some of the faster guys, I guess.
Yeah.
It can take a long time, like maybe at more rural competitions.
Right, and for combined rounds at competitions, instead of 3 solves for people who are getting a full average and 1 solve for people who don't make the cutoff, people who don't make the cutoff would get twice as many solves, and people who do would get 5 solves. So it would mean that the event would take almost twice as long, which could be problematic for competition schedules.
Exactly.
Either the schedule would have to allot more time for it, or the cutoffs would have to drop down in order to allow fewer people to make the cutoff.
Yeah. Why isn't the WCA counting thousandth place for competition times? Like with the Felix Zemdeg's 4.59, that tied the world record. So, I mean, I guess technically one guy was faster, but you're not recording that. Could you explain?
Sure. So when the speed stacks timers were the first ones we started using back in 2003, they didn't record to the thousandth place. They only recorded to the hundredth place. And so we got used to doing that for a long time. When they introduced a new timer that recorded to the thousandth place, we weren't quite sure about the accuracy of that, and we also weren't sure that we needed that type of accuracy. So with the older timers, we noticed that not all times were even possible. That, for example, like a time might be 1.28, and then the next time available might not be it might not be until like 1.31. There was a gap in the times that could actually be recorded on the timer. Mm-hmm. So when they introduced a new timer, we didn't think that it would actually record all of the different thousandths and that it had accuracy to the thousandth place, but it would definitely have accuracy to at least to the hundredth place. So for our needs, it made sense to just keep it to the hundredth place and not change the way we were recording results.
Okay, so that does allow for ties.
Yes, it does. And they're generally rare. They happen, but not too often, especially not in competitions when we determine based on an average of 5, where you're taking the average of 3 specific results to the hundredth place. Ties are relatively uncommon in that way.
Now, let's move on to the topic of nationals. First question, and you might not want to give too much information on this one. How do you guys decide where nationals is going to be?
That's a great question. Part of it is to just find venues that are big enough that are within our budget. And that could be difficult to do. So we submit to different cities to send us proposals for what they can offer. And we generally look for a venue that would have between 20 and 30,000 square feet in order to accommodate, somewhere around 800 competitors or so. And it's definitely a bonus if the city is desirable to visit. Obviously, some cities are better to visit than others. So that's one of the factors that we're taking into consideration now to try to increase attendance for nationals and make it a more enjoyable experience.
What about for placement in the U.S., though? Do you decide like across the country from where it was the previous year or north to south?
We generally try to move it around, but sometimes the deal that we get is just too good to pass up that we might keep it nearby to where it was the previous year. Thinking back to when we held Worlds in Las Vegas, I think we held Nationals the year before that in the same place. So we don't always move it around, but we generally try to. It gives people more of an opportunity to travel around to different places, but also people who have difficulty traveling can still get to a big competition if it eventually moves to somewhere nearby them.
Okay, one quick question before we continue with Nats. Why is Worlds held every 2 years?
I think it's out of tradition. I wondered about that because the first time it was held was 2003, and that was by Dan Gosby up in Toronto. And then the next one wasn't until 2005. So I think it's just been because the first time that was held and the second time it was held was 2 years apart that it just became normal that it was always arranged 2 years apart. But I'm not 100% sure on that.
Okay. Yeah, that's just something I've wondered about recently, and I'm sure other people have as well. But getting back to Nats, what is the process of getting everything ready up to registration opening? Is it basically the same as like organizing a smaller regular competition, but at a much bigger scale?
Yeah, there's a lot of coordination that needs to happen in order to get everything ready. We have spreadsheets to keep track of all of the things that we need to get done, and trackers that assign different people to different tasks for all of the things that need to get done before registration opens. But it involves a ton of emails and a ton of meetings. And our organization team just keeps on growing because there's so much more work that needs to be done with nationals that it's been getting difficult to do with the same team. Especially a lot of us are getting busy as we get older. And so we've been trying to add more people to that organization team. But it's hard to coordinate things among, 12, 13 people.
I can see that. Since you're one of the main organizers of Nats this year, what has been your favorite part so far?
Ooh, that's tough. I'm excited to go back to Salt Lake City. I do have some fun experiences in that area. So I think it'll be a good competition, mostly because I think Salt Lake City is going to be more fun to visit than Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Now, how far ahead do you set up the venue?
Usually we try to get the venue arranged at least a year in advance, but we're not always able to do so. But generally, at least 8 or 9 months is a minimum. So if we're arranging something for July or August, we try to get everything ready as early as we can. If we can get it arranged before the previous year's nationals, that's ideal. But if not, then, by September or October is pretty much the latest we would ever want that venue set up.
Okay, I understand. Now, what are the competition days like for you? Probably a lot of sleepless nights, correct?
Yeah, it's very busy. By the time we get to the venue, we're basically working the whole time. So it means working from like 7 or 7:30 in the morning until usually about 7 or 7:30 in the evening. And like a guy like me, I don't make second rounds for anything anymore. I'm way too slow for that now. So there's not much competing other than the first day, with the exception of maybe like a fewest move solve here or there. But in the other time, I'm usually calling groups for the competition or dealing with incidents. With a competition of this size, there's just constantly issues when you have 800 people at a competition. So it means a lot of going over to different stations or making sure that staff are where they need to be and things like that.
How do you guys keep track of all the scorecards? I know it's probably a huge just chaos, and things could get lost so easily.
Yeah, and every once in a while something like that happens where a scorecard gets misplaced, especially for events like 3x3 where there's hundreds and hundreds of scorecards, and somebody might have been mistaken for maybe they were mistakenly missed and their results weren't entered and they need to be in the next round or something like that. It could be almost disastrous, but we have we have scorecard checkers that go back and check the times of the cards that have been entered to make sure that everything's correct, to try to reduce those issues that might happen later. And it also helps that we have these checkers at the competition. Previously, we used to just check them the night of the competition afterwards, and that meant less sleep. So now that we have people checking them at the competition, it's really helped to give us more time to focus on just resting in the evening.
Now, my next question was, what's the hardest thing about doing a competition of this size? Is that one of the things?
That's certainly one of them, but I would say probably that there's just so many people and so much going on that there's always something that needs to be dealt with. And so it can be hard. And that's why we typically have a couple of organizers set aside that might not have any jobs at a particular time, just to deal with any issues that might arise. Maybe there's an issue that happens with a competitor at a station where an extra solve might be given, or sometimes it's even something where we have to deal with something with the venue itself. So that's probably the hardest part with a competition like this, that there's always something going on.
Oh, yeah, I can definitely see that. Now, well, talking about big competitions, let's move right on to the regional championships. Could you talk a little bit about the story behind getting these announced, not announced, or just announced to the public, and like where the idea came from? I know I've started hearing about it late, like last July of 2017, and like, so when did you guys start thinking about this?
Sure. So right after Nationals, Tim Reynolds and I were thinking about formalizing this process a lot more than what it's been. So there were some regional championships that were already announced, like there was a Northwest Championship and there was a Southern Championship. But we wanted to make them a little bit more formal and to try to make sure that we had one in each of the regions. So it took a lot of planning and a lot of emails to sort of split up into the different regions and then to try to plan these competitions so that everybody would have a chance to attend a big competition. One of the benefits of that is that people can attend a competition that has all of the events or almost all of the events as extra chances to qualify for nationals, because some people might not get chances to qualify for nationals because some events just might not be held near them. So by having these regional championships, we're giving people more of an opportunity to attend a big competition, especially if they can't get to nationals, and also to qualify for nationals.
How was the success of the Heartland Championship?
We're still learning. It was a good competition, but it's helped point out some things that we still need to work on. This whole thing is tough, especially the first time around, because we're going from planning just nationals to now planning nationals and 7 regional championships. And so it's certainly been a lot of work on our end. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes on trying to get all of these competitions announced and to deal with venues and contracts and things like that. Another thing that we're trying to deal with is streaming, and we're trying to make that norm at the regionals as well as nationals. And so we're hoping that as these progress, we'll get better and better at them each year.
Where do you see the future of regional championships? Are they going to be a recurring event?
Yeah, I would hope so. I'd like to see regionals become normal for each year. And I would like to see even state championships to become a normal thing. So that's why with the regional championships, people would get a chance to compete in a big competition. But also if state championships became normal, the idea would be that maybe in the spring there would be a regional championship, in the summer there would be nationals, and then in the fall maybe a state championship. It would give people more opportunities to attend big competitions and also give people more things to aim for. Becoming national champion is hard. Becoming a regional champion is much easier. And becoming a state champion is even easier. So it gives people different bars that they could shoot for.
I definitely like that idea, and I could possibly help out with that. I currently hold the state record for Pyramix, single and average, so I'm excited about that. What about some events not being held in the regional championship? Why is that? Like feet or clock at the Northwestern, I think it was.
The regional championships are still organized by outside organizers, and so they do have some flexibility in determining their own schedule. Not all of these competitions are the same amount of time either. Some are 2 days, while some are 3 days. And so for some, it might just be the trouble of getting all of the events into a schedule that fits in the amount of time. So sometimes concessions had to be made, especially with an event like clock. If you don't have good scramblers for the event, it could really be troublesome for the schedule.
I did get a question in from a listener, Aiden Noogie, on speed solving. He asked, When are the Northeast Championships going to be announced? And keep in mind that this podcast will be going out April 30th.
I expect that they'll be announced by then already.
Okay, then everybody will be happy to hear that, or have heard that.
I'll tell you that they're in June, so they should be announced really soon.
Okay, great, thank you. Now, how does someone become a WCA delegate? Ever since I went to my first competition, I have wondered that.
So delegates, we restructured this whole system a little bit, but delegates are nominated by the senior delegate, and then they get approved by the board. So senior delegates determine, usually based on who they see helping out at competitions and showing leadership skills, who would be a good fit for the position. And then they submit a form to the WCA board, and the WCA board votes to determine whether or not that we agree that this person would make a good delegate.
Mm-hmm. Could you explain the levels in the WCA? I know they start out as a candidate delegate, then regular delegate, senior, and then board. Sure.
So a candidate delegate is the first stage when a delegate is nominated. They become a candidate delegate. In order to become a full delegate, they need to have been a delegate for at least a year, and they need to delegate at least a certain number of competitions. I think it's 5 in order to become a full delegate. Generally, the only difference between a candidate delegate and a full delegate is that a regular delegate can vote in elections. Then above that are the senior delegates, who mostly serve the same purpose as delegates, but they also oversee all of the delegates in their region. They appoint new delegates in areas where they need them, and they keep track of the delegates of the region to make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to. Above that is the board, who oversees the senior delegates.
Now, what's your favorite part about delegating competitions?
I like bringing competitions to more people and seeing the involvement spread to new leadership teams.
Have you ever had any big mistakes that you have made, or the organizer? My fear with my biggest fear as being an organizer is forgetting to do an important thing, I don't know, something with the scorecards or getting something ready for the delegate.
Yeah, I've definitely seen some big mistakes. Back at a competition back in 2006 or 2007, I remember when one of the organizers forgot the scorecards, and so we didn't have any, and that was a bit of a wrench in our plans for the day. Especially there were over 100 competitors at that competition. There was a big one, especially for that time. So that was a problem. Even recently, I delegated the competition at Rutgers. The venue we originally planned for had enough space to put 16 timers, but they changed the venue on us, and the venue they moved us to only had enough space for 10 timers. So that was a bit of a pain as well, that we tried to keep on schedule, but with 6 fewer stations than we were planning to, just wasn't possible. We had to cut out a few rounds.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm worried about, but I try to keep big lists of everything I need to do, and hopefully something like that never happens.
Yeah, keeping track of what you need to do, it really helps. Even when you're experienced, it's easy to forget something. So keeping track of what needs to be done and making sure that you have checklists for everything you need to bring are definitely helpful.
Now, do you have any fun stories or fun moments from your whole history in the WCA, any period of time?
One of my favorite competitions was the Utah Open 2009. I stayed with Michael Young for that competition. And before the competition, a bunch of us actually went skiing, which was my first and only time skiing. But it was really fun to spend less time thinking about the competition and more time just having fun. So that was really good, and I actually did really well at that competition.
Well, thank you, Bob, for taking the time to come on the Corner Cutter podcast. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I learned a ton.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
I want to thank Bob once again for taking some time out of his busy schedule to come on the Corner Cutter podcast. I greatly appreciate it. One other thing, I'm planning to have someone from the WRC, which is the Regulations Committee, on the podcast to talk more about how they come up with new regulations and reasons they've changed some regulations in the past. I think that would be a very interesting show. An episode coming out in the next few weeks will be a debate show, like I mentioned last week. I got 2 people to email in, and they're very interested in coming on and debating some topics. Those 2 people are Jack and Aiden. It's a different Jack from JBC Short Films, just to make that clear. But I haven't got any emails yet for the next YouTuber show. It's a really good way to advertise your channel. There are a few qualifications, the main one being you have to have over 100 subscribers. So if you're interested in that, please email me, feedback@thecornercutterpodcast.com. Or you can use the contact page, which is the feedback page on the website, thecornercutterpodcast.com. Well, it's time to take this episode back to the scrambling table. Come back next week for episode 36 of the Corner Cutter Podcast. Here's some bloopers from the interview. Why isn't there, why don't you guys record thousandth? Why don't you guys record thousandth place in for? Let me do that again.
Sure.
Why isn't the WC? Oh man.